he had just been named #2 album of the year in the New York Times. And I'm just like, oh my God, we're back. That's the kind of news back then that could like really change your life. I get another call and I see it's David's label. I answer the phone. It's product manager. We're dropping you. We're dropping David. My name is Gil Gastelum. I'm the founder and president of Cosmica Artists here in Los Angeles. I was born in Tucson, Arizona. I am 53 years old. I moved out here to LA 29 years ago to be a tour manager, but always with an eye to my aspiration after college was I wanted to work at a record label, and that's why I came out here, and ultimately that's what I did. The role that music had in my childhood growing up, always music in the house. My father is a button accordion player, plays what you would consider Tex-Mex music. So I grew up with that, and my mom always listened to what's now considered AM pop nuggets, I guess, Elton John, Captain and Tennille. And then when my dad would come home from work, they would put on their, between Mexican music and oldies but goodies, Richie Valens and Buddy Holly were like played, or I should say loomed large at the household. And still they're a big influence musically for me to this day. And so, you know, going to school where I went to, you know, it was primarily Latina students who were to varying degrees assimilating. And so rock and R&B and rap later were sort of the big things that people listened to. And my dad really struggled mightily with me to embrace my roots. It wasn't that I was ever ashamed of it. It just wasn't the cool thing at the time. It was like the kids were listening to, you know, Van Halen. I loved Van Halen, and you know, Run DMC and whatnot. And so the big connection finally for me to connect more of the rock ethos with the Mexican music was one night. I remember doing my homework in the living room, and my dad came over and he says, "You're going to watch this with me. You know, put your homework away. I want you to watch this with me." And it was a show. It was a special on a group called Los Lobos, and I believe the special was called "In a Time to Dance," and it was the making of their EP, and it traces their East LA roots and the Mexican music that they played, the traditional Mexican music that they played, mixed with rock, and how they were part of the first wave of punk rock here in Los Angeles. And that blew me away. That made me connect on a very sort of pop culture type of way with my roots, which really kind of was the first time, because, you know, back then it was very segregated, very, you know, siloed away from like the general pop culture at the time, which was everywhere. And Mexican music or Mexican culture or Latin culture really wasn't. Very rarely did it ever cross over into that. There was some, of course, but not like that. Not like where it was so visceral and this was cool. And so that forever changed my life in terms of like what I gravitated towards. And to this day, the kind of music that I sign or that I'm looking for with the company. I remember reading a review, interview previewing a show that was coming to Club Congress, which is still around. It's located in an old hotel in Tucson, and I remember the interviewer was complaining in the article that this pretentious musician made her pronounce his first name correctly. It's She says it's David, but he was so pretentious that he was making her say David, which is the Spanish pronunciation of David. And I was like, whoa, that's, you know, at the time that felt a little gutsy. I was like, so I read the review and I was like, wow, this guy sounds pretty cool. I want to check it out. You know, back then I couldn't just like stream it. So I invited some friends and I promised some drinks if they went with me. And there was all of like, I think 15 people there for the show. And the guy played his ass off. He was such a great guitar player. You know, it was like 15 of us and it might as well have been 15,000 people there. And it made me think that night, it's like, oh man, what am I doing? It's like, I'm never going to be that good. Any kind of thoughts I had of maybe being a musician kind of went out the window that night, to be honest. You know, a lot of people hate that story, but it was true. And it got me to think about like what made me excited, you know, because I was always the guy with like the new music, the new tapes, the new vinyl back then, and then later the CDs. But it was never good enough just to listen to the music, never good enough to just stare at the art. I also was obsessed with liner notes. And in the liner notes, I got to sort of like put together the different executives, producers, engineers, of course, but also the executives who were behind some of the greatest music I feel exists to this day. And so then I connected the dots with working at the record shop, and I started becoming more and more wanting to see who's doing what now. So I started reading Billboard magazine and Hits magazine and all the other ones, the trades that were back in the day. And I felt like that was something that I might want to try. So I remember coming out here for a conference, getting a hotel. I didn't know anything about LA, and getting a hotel and almost literally getting my butt kicked, just in a bad neighborhood out in the valley. Again, really far from where I was even supposed to be at in Burbank for this conference. But despite that, I was like, you know what? I really like this. So I got a chance. There was a punk artist named Robert Lopez, aka Elvez, the Mexican Elvis. He came into town. Him and I had corresponded as pen pals over the years. I was a young kid that loved LA punk in general, but LA in particular, and he was in a group called the Zeros. He was coming into town for this Elvez act. So I went totally blown away, met him for the first time after years of correspondence. And he mentions to me, he's like, hey, you know, if you want to come to LA, I do need like an assistant tour manager. So, you know, I don't have much money, but like if you want to come out, we'll get on the road and, you know, we'll tour the States and Europe and whatnot. So I ended up coming out here. And I was a kid that hardly went anywhere. I think we went to Disneyland twice on vacation my entire time that I lived at home. To all of a sudden, I'm in a Winnebago with 10 people for the entirety of a summer. Every night a show. And after the tour finished, I came back, didn't have a place to stay. I had my truck, my little pickup truck, and I just started sleeping in my truck. I was like that for about 7 months. I managed to get another record store gig that was on Sunset called the Virgin Megastore. It's a great shop. It's no longer there. And I lived there. I lived in my truck for 7 months, took showers before I would start work, and that's how I did it. And then I was finally, I got an internship at MCA Records, which is now known as Universal. I was only supposed to be there 1 day a week because I didn't have anything else to do, and I didn't want to be in my truck any more than I had to be already. I would show up every day, and I would just go anybody that needed help. If they needed to ship out hundreds of mailers to retail shops or whatever, I was happy to do it. I lived in the mailroom for them. And finally, after about a year and a half of doing that, somebody new that came in from A&M Records came in. He's like, Gil, you're here every day. You don't get paid. And everybody's just like marvels that you are here ready to help. Every morning you come in and you stay until you have to go to work. It's like, I know of an opening at at the label I was at before A&M Records for assistant in marketing. I want to recommend you. Give me your resume. So I sent him my resume, got an interview. I was lucky I got it. And then that started an almost 3-year work with A&M Records. Got to work with, you know, some of the smallest of the small bands that they had and some of the biggest bands that they had. And then I made a decision that to this day has really impacted the direction I went in this business. Is I got asked by a friend that I had known for a while, Robert Rodriguez, the film director, to help him with his music stuff. And I left A&M, which at the time you don't leave a major to go to indie. Indie is not like what indie is now. Indie was like no man's land. That was like tumbleweeds, you know. And everybody that knew I was leaving to do that said, oh, you'll be back. You'll be back. And I've never gone back. I've stayed independent since that fateful decision back in at the end of '96. And I ended up moving to Austin, managed that artist that blew me away with his guitar playing, that made me quit playing guitar myself. His name was David Garza. He was signed to Atlantic Records at the time. I came in originally to be his, just sort of like his administrative guy, day-to-day guy. And then about a month into working with him, he fired his manager and says, you're the guy. And so that started like my true management career. And then went up to Woodstock, made a record with the rhythm section of Living Color, a great record, and went on tour with Matchbox 20 and Train. And the record comes out, and then 9/11 happens. And for anybody that was around at that time, that was like basically the precursor to the pandemic. It was like the industry, all entertainment literally stopped for a couple months. Tour got canceled, and we were dead in the water, really. He decides with his then wife to move to LA, and I was like, you know what, I think I need to get back to LA as well. And I start temping, and I remember I was temping at Hollywood Records at the Disney lot in Burbank. And since I was a temp, back then, you know, I had a flip phone. I wasn't allowed to take any personal calls while I was working. So one day, I'll always remember the day, November 1st, the phone is just buzzing. I had to put it back in my pocket because it was just ringing off the hook. I was like, what is happening? I thought maybe it was spam or something, you know, or scam calls, excuse me. So I take my lunch, I start checking my messages, all these people that I know, people from execs and stuff like that, congratulating David and myself because he had just been named #2 album of the year in the New York Times, only behind Leonard Cohen. And I'm just like, oh my God, we're back. We're back. And, you know, his booking agent's calling, you know, we're getting calls about, you know, potential shows and stuff like that. That's the kind of news back then that could like really change your life. And then I remember on November 2nd, the next day, I'm walking, I had just parked, walking back into the Disney lot, into the building. I get another call and I see it's David's label. I was like, you know, we're gonna have a new marketing plan. It's all this stuff like swirls in my head real fast. I answer the phone, it's product manager, we're dropping you. We're dropping David. And so basically, yeah, he got dropped, and he lost his publishing deal that day too. It was part of a merger that had happened when AOL was around and bought off Time Warner. And so they had to cut off all the fat. And it was a decision that had been made prior to the New York Times list. So that was already in the making. So just bad timing. And that led to a really long process of, back then you would, showcase your artist to try to get signed again. So David would play Largo, the original Largo that was on Fairfax, and I would have A&R guys come and say, "Oh man, he's great. You should talk to our Latin division." I said, "Well, don't you think that might be a problem? He sings all in English. They're just saying race or ethnicity, And to the credit of some of them, they would set up a meeting, would go over there, and they're like, the Latin division, but like, "Guess esto, what is this? He doesn't sing in Spanish. We can't do anything with that." So rock in a hard place. And I remember finally, there was like 3 days to like another showcase I had set up. David calls me and says, "Hey man, I can't do this anymore. I'm sorry. You got to let them know I'm not going to do the showcase. The only way I'm going to put out a record is you start a label." And another thing where it's like easier said than done, took me about 9 months. And the only reason why I got the distribution deal that I got at the time, because I had one artist. Nobody wanted to talk to me back then. But I got a call from a guy that managed another band that had been on Atlantic that David had toured with. And he just called me out of the blue. He just said, "Hey man, what are you guys up to, man? I really liked you guys. Like, I know, all of us lost, our acts lost their gigs." He says, "But what are you guys up to? Like, what's David up to?" I was like, "Well, just haven't been able to get him signed, and I'm trying to start my own labels," because he said, he'll put his music out through me. He's like, "Well, damn, I'm glad I called you today." He goes, "I just happened to become, a week ago, I became the senior VP of business development at Red Eye Distribution over here in North Carolina." He goes, "I'm going to send you a contract because I want David with us." And so that's how it started. And David being David, very prolific guy. I mean, by the time he signed with Atlantic, he had already put out, I think, 21 records. And they made him put them all out of print. And so when it came time, I had the deal in place. So when it came time to put something out, we talked about it. It's like, man, it doesn't make any sense to put out those 21 records again. Because at that time, Tower Records, this is 2004, all the brick and mortar record shops were closing up at that time. Tower had just filed for bankruptcy. He goes, "Don't worry about it. I'll come back to you in a month with your record." And so he comes back to me in a month. Yeah, he had re-recorded much of his catalog and turned in I think it was 71 song. It was a 4 CD, 1 DVD, 70-page box set. That's what it was. That was my first release. We had to take out a loan just to manufacture that thing. I didn't even have money to send out promos. I was making burn CDs on a real-time burner because I couldn't even afford to have a burner that burned like 2 times or 4 times quicker, And yeah, so that's kind of the beginnings of Cosmica. Altogether, we're at about 9 artists altogether. We have some that are both on label and management, and some that are just management, and some that are just label. Do I think that the sort of broad definition of what it is to be a Latin artist is changing? I definitely do feel like it is evolving. I still don't feel like it's exactly where it needs to be. I do feel that sometimes what could consider to be shortcomings, I think sometimes are self-inflicted. I think less and less it's coming from external forces. And I think sometimes we limit ourselves. That might be an unpopular take, but that's the way I see it. I think that the industry only likes to promote wins rather than like the folks that are trying to come up. So that's why a lot of times I feel like, yeah, I'm Latin, but I'm not really part of the Latin industry a lot of times. I don't subscribe to a lot of the tropes and the kinds of things. And again, I'm talking internally within the Latin industry of what is expected or what has become like normal business practices, or the kinds of music that is being promoted more than others. And I just don't feel like I'm a part of that. But I think that, you're seeing more than ever more folks that aren't Latin embracing the music. You listen to a pop station and, it's kind of like nothing now. You hear something in Spanish every other couple songs. So it's certainly a part of that, as like for me as a personal dream come true. But I do feel like we have a ways to go on the business front of things as well. Sometimes I feel like, again, when we're talking within like the infrastructure of a major label, for example, it reminds me of that Chris Rock skit, and I don't know if I'll get it right entirely, but it's like, for white folks the sky's the limit. For black folks, it's limits the sky. It's like it's you'll see budgets. I will see a budget for a commercial for like a general market artist, and then I'll see for basically the same campaign for a Latin artist, and it's like a fraction of what that is, even though this artist on the Latin side of things sells just as much as the person on the general market. You see time and time again in the advertising space, the budgets just aren't fair. They're not where they need to be. They haven't made, a lot of them haven't made the adjustment to like how much people are consuming music in Spanish or from Latin artists. And that's certainly something that is, again, that's part of the business aspect that I'm alluding to. It's still not where it needs to be. You don't see it, the everyday consumer doesn't see it. Like back then, it was palpable, it was something that you could see. I was like, oh yeah, that's on the Latin label, and that cassette looks like it's already going to fall apart by the time you buy it. Now you don't notice it, but like, for the folks that work behind the scenes, you see the budgets, and there's a big discrepancy there still. And as far as, what interests me in music these days, I am always blown away by the innovation of imagination with people that are able to create music. These are folks that some of them can't barely tie their shoe because and they'll tell you that too. I mean, they can barely function in society, but you put a guitar in their hand or you put a piano in front of them, and they become an absolute master at what they do. And that always fascinates me. Again, the ability to create something out of nothing, out of an experience, out of something they saw, or they overheard somebody say a certain phrase, and it may not even end up being what that was the original phrase, something that inspired an idea. And I think for me that always, it just blows my mind that kind of stuff can still happen in this day and age, especially with, the advent of, so much technology and whatnot. You could literally just lay back and hum a tune into your computer and it'll make the music for you. So I think the human aspect of it is always still very important for me and fascinating. So my history journey with Fuga started in 2019. It was the 15-year anniversary of starting Cosmica. We called it our quinceañera. And threw a party over in Highland Park in Northeast LA at a venue that's no longer around called the Hi-Hat. Had a couple acts, including the Marias, who I was their first manager, and they had just signed with Atlantic Records. And so it was kind of a big deal to have them as part of the celebration. And had a great night, and things were starting to wind down. And this guy gets in my face. He goes, "Hey man, like, I've been trying to get a hold of you." And I go, "What? I'm sorry, what's your name?" And he says, "Oscar Burros Rangel. I've got a printout of all the stuff that you're not collecting on for YouTube." And I was like, "Excuse me?" He goes, "Yeah." And he has this spreadsheet that he had been holding on to all night. I mean, this was like a 4-hour party we had. And I had seen him through the night. I didn't know who he was. I had seen him, and I'm like, "Oh my God, I was like, wait a minute, you brought a spreadsheet with you?" So he brings this big old spreadsheet, and he shows me a list. And he goes, "Yeah, look at all these things that are, all these songs that are unclaimed." And I see the song from Carla Morrison that I had been chasing, a DJ had put out unauthorized. And I was like, "When can we meet tomorrow?" He goes, "How about 10 o'clock? And he gives me his card. He's like, "Here's the address. I already let everybody know that you're going to be coming by." I was like, "Damn, I like this guy, man. He had confidence." I was like, "Shoot." And he left me the list. He left me the spreadsheet. I was like, "Damn." I was like, "Wow, this is way bigger than I had even imagined." That, I knew that there was things that we needed to collect, but like at that time I had no bandwidth or ability to be able to be collecting off of that. If Google wasn't doing that, then we weren't going to get paid. So I went literally the next day, went to go visit him, meet him and the staff over there, and they were ready. They had this whole presentation again, it was like they were ready for me to come over there and meet with them. It was amazing. And I was like, "Okay, send me the agreement." And so we got it done. And so things started to really change in terms of like how we approached the YouTube thing, because at that point it had still been a bit of a mystery for me. I will never be confused with somebody that is adept at tech and certainly the ability to collect on different sides of a master and recording and video. It was really amazing to see these people, this team, so passionate about what they did, because as they said it, they were there to help the artist and they were there to help me. And that really, when they said that really resonated with me, as not only as a company owner, but as a person. And so that's how it began. And then we signed the agreement, and then of course the pandemic happened. But literally, had I not signed that agreement, I'm pretty damn sure Cosmica would not have lasted past the pandemic. That literally kept the company going during those lean times. I didn't have to lay off anybody, because our artists were doing really well on the YouTube side of things, and that saved me and saved the company and saved my employees' jobs. And throughout that time, Oscar has always been really gung ho about what we do. I think he also took like a personal stake in the company in terms of just like, you know, just really working hard for us. And and then I've met some great people on this team, and I feel very, very strong. You know, on the downtown side of things, Ben Patterson is somebody that I really look up to a lot. I think Ben has always been a really straight up guy, and he's done a really wonderful job moving up the ranks at downtown. Same with Ray Tapia over here as well. Um, and you know, Ray got me thinking about, you know, I had this distribution deal with this other company, but like I hadn't even been thinking about like beyond where I should go after that deal was up. And Ray got me, and Ben got me thinking about that. And then, and then a good friend of mine that I had lost a little bit in touch with when the pandemic hit hard, Sarah Landy, turns out that she's here. Oscar's the one who's like, hey, do you know Sarah Landy? I was like, yeah. I was like, how do you know Sarah? And he's like, well, she's working at downtown now. You didn't know that? I go, no, I didn't know that. And so, yeah, so it just really hammered home how great a feeling I get when I think about Fuga, when I think about downtown, and how they really took my company and myself in when, you know, a lot of companies, you know, we're on the smaller end on the business spectrum. A lot of companies wouldn't even see us as a blip, and Fuga looked at us as this is something we can work with, and I'm forever grateful for that. And yeah, it makes it. I'm really hoping that we can continue our relationship, and of course the friendship as well. That's all the stuff that I really can aspire to. I'm 53 years old now. I'm too old for, like, well, it's like I want to work with the people I want to work with, and these are the people I want to work with.